talking about biblical culture, biblical values. The biblical culture was the counterculture of that period of time. Why? What did people believe? Many, many gods. Gods that were in conflict with each other, not gods that created an ethic and one human race that was equal. Judaism, the Bible comes along and says, no. There's one God, and that one God created you and created you equal and gave you a moral and ethical guide. There's one God, not many gods. Then, every culture had a king. The Jewish people, the Bible did not. It was an anti-king. Eventually there was a king because the people demanded it, but it was anti-king. Why? Because a king is some ultimate authority. There is no ultimate authority. We have to have a government that has a set of rules that are based upon these biblical values, and they have to enforce the rules, and nobody's above the law. Kings are above the law. Not in Israel. In Israel, in the Bible, David was subjected to the same laws as everybody else, and when he sinned, when he went against the law, he was contradicted, he was criticized, and he accepted the criticism. So it was against the idea of a king. And of course the other thing was, not only the king and the many gods, there was also the counterculture in terms of knowledge. The law, the tradition was open to everyone. It was an open book. Everyone was required even to study it and read it. It wasn't secretive, like it was in so many cultures, but only the priesthood. And they would interpret it for you, and they would control you because they had the holy text. They kept you ignorant, and they controlled you and made you fear God. There is no fear of the Lord in biblical literature. There's holding God in awe because of his greatness for having created an unbelievable world and giving us this dignity as human beings, that great gift that he gave to all human beings. I remember very little about New York, because I didn't like cold weather. But what I remember about New York was that all the family was very close. Everybody was nearby. I had a cousin who lived in the apartment above. My uncle and my aunt had a vegetable store around the corner. I was allowed to wander there, and I used to eat string beans raw. And I remember that. I don't do it anymore, but I really enjoyed string beans raw. And you can wander. Things were safe there. Nobody even worried. And just wandered through, picked whatever on from the fruit and vegetable store. But I went to school in New York for kindergarten and first grade. I have no memory whatsoever of ever attending school. The only thing I remember is the croup cough. If you've had the croup cough, you never forget that sound or that feeling. And I had it quite often, missed a lot of days. But I must have learned how to read, because when I got to Miami, I remember I was doing okay in school. But what I really remember most is the day that my father got the call that he received the position in Miami. All I knew about Miami is that it was warm weather and palm trees. And I remember the day we left. We were playing stickball out in the street, which you could do then without any problem. Waiting for my father to drive up in the car the first car I think I remember us ever owning, because we didn't need a car in New York. And the drive down. Now, the drive down was fascinating. First of all, a lot of it was not I-95. Once you hit the deep south, you're on regular streets, so you had to be kind of careful about that. But I remember specifically stopping at a restaurant, and there were no chain restaurants then. You stopped at a local restaurant, and we went in. I had to go to the bathroom, and I went, and I remember that afterwards I came out to ask either my mother or my father, I don't remember which one, because there was a sign there, so see, I knew I could read. I don't remember how I learned, but I knew I could read. And it said, one of them said colored. All I could think is, I wanted to know, does that mean that the different the bathrooms were painted in different colors, and I was supposed to choose a certain color? I wanted to know which color I should choose, which bathroom I should go into. I had no concept of what it meant, colored and white, that it referred to Negroes, as we called them then, or blacks. Back in the 50s, the conservative movement understood what was happening in America. America was a melting pot. Everyone was looking to fit in together. We weren't looking to accentuate differences, we were looking to accentuate that which we had in common. Baseball is a sport that is 9 individuals who cannot succeed unless they play as a team, and that everything is based upon the interrelationship, both when they're on the field playing defense and the whole organization of the batting. And it's an intricate sport in which every piece has to be moved around. One thing about that sport, the manager plays a very significant role But most people, if they don't understand the sport, it looks simple and it looks boring because it doesn't move very quick. It's a sport you have to really understand. And my parents loved baseball. My mother was an incredible Dodger fan, having grown up in Brooklyn, and Jackie Robinson was her big hero. And my father loved the Dodgers as well. So there was always a rule. My parents had very few rules in the house, but no Yankee hat could be worn in our house. And that remains today in my house. Being a very big baseball fan, I look at it when everybody would go to the baseball game, and everybody had an accent. You know, my grandmother had an accent. A lot of people had accent, and they had different colored skins. They looked different. They're from different places, but everybody was cheering for the same team, the home team. Everybody was wearing the home team hat. Everybody was eating the hot dog, all right, because that's the American thing to do, and maybe drinking a Coke. And everybody, when you heard the national anthem, at that time in the melting pot, people stood there at attention and belted it out with such pride, because we were coming together and forming this incredible nation, this new aspect of the nation, this immigrant nation. And the conservative movement understood that, and it was right in the middle of the road, and it knew how to relate to the less religious, the more religious. It had excellent relationships with non-Jews. We were out in the community, in the suburbs, with the churches, and we were in the public schools, and it was a melting pot of cooperation and mutual respect. And that's when the conservative movement thrived. Then something changed in America, and I'm not saying it changed for bad, it's a change, and we had to respond to it, and we didn't always know how, and that was a return or beginning of ethnicity. Ethnicity was everybody said, no, I want to emphasize my identity, not the identity of the overall American culture. I want to wear my hair the way my ancestors were. I want to dress the way they did, or I want to speak the way they did, and I want to focus on my ethnicity and my religion and my nationality and my group. And that was totally different. Now, Jews are like everybody else, only more so. So Jews started to do it, but did it even to a greater degree. And suddenly, whereas they once had an article, I think it was at Look magazine, it was Look magazine, about the death of Orthodoxy. It was disappearing. It came back strong because Orthodoxy emphasizes ethnicity and a certain amount of a disconnect from the outside community and a focus on, not on the other, but within. And as a result, that started to strengthen. It got much, much stronger. And the conservative movement was still in the middle. And if you look around America, wherever you look, the middle, whether it be in politics, whether it be in religion, wherever it is, the middle is beginning to collapse. That, to me, is a danger in any society, because the middle is what holds the fringes together and creates the wholeness of the society and keeps it moving in the right direction. It creates the balance. So the strengthening of the middle is extremely important to me for this entire country, not just the conservative movement. But in any religious group, we need to strengthen the middle because we need to relate to the other. We need to be able to get along. We need to be able to work together to strengthen our communities. Jews, Christian, Muslims, secular, atheists. We have to have that common denominator, which was that melting pot, that belief in America, that America based upon biblical values that we all share. Even the non-believer shares the ethics of the Old Testament, the work ethic, the respect for the human being, freedom, the whole Exodus story, the emphasis on freedom for the individual and for the nation. We need to return to those central values and work together more as a community. And that's why it's so important to me the conservative movement remains strong, because it represents the middle for the Jewish community, and I hope that'll be true of all the religious groups in our country. We moved to Miami Beach for the short period of time to rent an apartment as the house was going to be built eventually that we were going to live in about a year later, maybe a year and a half later. And I remember we should drive along Collins Avenue because it was so pretty then. It was just, you just went for a ride. You know, we did that in the 50s, just kind of an outing. And I saw a sign, which is proof that I actually could read. I do remember that now. And the sign was in front of a hotel called the Kenilworth. And it said, "No Jews and no dogs." I didn't know what to make of it. That was just stunning to me and frightening, I guess, in a way. It was just shocking. Found out later it was owned by Arthur Godfrey. Ironically, my grandmother loved to watch the Arthur Godfrey show. She didn't read English, so we didn't tell her about the signs. She just enjoyed Arthur Godfrey. And that was really a shock, and I became very much aware of the existence of anti-Semitism, which I never sensed, of course, in New York City, in the Bronx, which is my only memory of New York. You must have a bar mitzvah coming up soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, as one of our bar mitzvah girls. She could be in the movie, too. All right. Who gave you such a long haftarah? Who did that? It's your parents' fault. It's when they gave birth to you. All men are created equal. Where does that idea come from? All men are created equal comes from the idea that's in the first chapters of Genesis, where it says that human beings are created in the image of God. If human beings are created in the image of God, then everyone is equal in the eyes of God. And whether one believes in God or not, it doesn't matter. Everyone is created special, everyone is holy, everyone is important. That's a biblical value that entered into America. If you take a coin, right? You look at it, what does it say? It says on it is liberty. Liberty is freedom. That's the whole Exodus story. The most important story in all of Judaism, the most important story in all of Christianity, the most important story in the Bible, the most important story in all of Western civilization, and I believe for all humanity, is the story of the Exodus from Egypt, which says that one nation cannot slave another. One man cannot enslave another. That is unacceptable. Whether you believe that God freed the Jewish people or not doesn't matter. We all accept that the enslavement of the Jewish people by Pharaoh was evil, and it had to be broken, and it was broken. And who doesn't applaud in the movie The Ten Commandments when the Jews cross the sea and are finally free? So we celebrate freedom. That's a biblical value. In God we trust. What does that mean? It doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not in God. What it means is that the values, the ethics, they are not situational, meaning that there are values and ethics that are above us that must be accepted as the guiding light and guiding principle of every society, and that we can't come along and change them. There are things that are right and there are things that are wrong, and that is universal. That's what it means in God we trust, that there is something above the individual, there is something above the particular government of that particular period of time. A universal ethic that protects the dignity of all human beings, and then, e pluribus unum, of many, one. The whole idea, the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, it was called an Erev Rav, a mixed multitude. Many people left Egypt. What does that mean? Anyone who believed in freedom, anyone who wanted to cast their lot with freedom, and the struggle for freedom, and the willingness to leave Egypt and put their lives at risk in the desert, and then to go back to a land where they could live in freedom. That's what Canaan was all about. That's what Israel is all about. Anyone who would cast their lot is welcome. The same thing in America. Anyone who wants to come here and cast their lot with American values, these biblical values, not religious values, values that come from the Old Testament, they're welcome here. Catching the steps too?
Go ahead.
Well, I usually fly down the steps. I don't walk. We noticed something very interesting when we were growing up, and that was that we went to restaurants, and my mother, we noticed, never ordered anything but vegetable chow mein, fish, or spaghetti without meat. My father ordered everything and anything. In fact, our opinion was that he would eat anything if it wasn't moving. If it was moving, and we weren't even sure about that. So my father had no restrictions dietary, but he would never, ever order for us anything that was inappropriate. We did probably eat things that we weren't supposed to, but we didn't notice it. And my mother never commented, and my father never forced us. And we noticed years later that it was let the children choose. And my mother kept kosher outside the home. My father did not. Inside the home, it was strictly kosher. My father never brought anything into the home that wasn't kosher and never would mix meat and dairy at the table. 5 minutes after the table was cleared, he'd pull out the ice cream, but he'd never offer it to us. We never understood why. If we wanted ice cream, we'd go get it. My father would never, when take himself ice cream after the meat dinner, would say, "Which boys, would you like some ice cream?" He would never offer. It was only years later that we figured out what he was doing. So it was an interesting relationship my parents had. My father was very supportive of our Jewish education, very proud that we went to synagogue regularly, even though he was never home on Shabbat. He got home mid-afternoon, and we had a pool. My parents built a pool. It was a big sacrifice they made, but they wanted to keep us close to home. And it worked, because we were always home, and all our friends came to our home, because we had the pool, and we had the parents couldn't care less if we trekked in the water and made a mess of the house. As long as the friends were there and the boys were there, they were happy. So that was a really good growing up, really good childhood.
This picture, when we were newlyweds, this was my first competition for his attention. The cat. She used to sit on his lap and study with him. I think that's funny. Anyway.
So we refer to presume that you won.
Yeah. Well, she died.
That's a fair competition.
She died. Okay, but that was our first cat, and he was not a pet person, but he's learned to be. But she used to study with him. And
there was many influences that caused me eventually to go to rabbinical school. My parents were very positive about my Hebrew school studies and very encouraging me going to shul. Most importantly were the cantor and the rabbis of my synagogue, Cantor Manny Mandel, Rabbi Zucker, and Rabbi Chaim Richter, who just embraced myself, my brother, and our friends who showed some interest in being in synagogue and participating. They encouraged us, and they would come to our house and teach us and then invite us to participate and help lead services. And we really enjoyed it. The rabbis became good friends of our family and encouraged my Uncle Lou, who had a great influence upon me and my brother. He wasn't an ordained rabbi because he didn't have time to go to school. He had to go earn a living. It was Depression years. But he was a lay leader type of rabbi. And we saw what he did in teaching bar bat mitzvahs, and he would go into the prisons and lead services for Jews who unfortunately were in prison in New York. He was the first one to do it, and he would lead high holidays, and that was a great influence as well. And then in high school, when I was a participant in the United Synagogue Youth Group, which I loved and participated regularly in it. It was my main activity other than regular school. And there I met Danny Siegel, my mentor and my teacher, a few years older than me, who was teaching a class at a summer encampment for youth group, for a United Synagogue Youth Group. It was raining, and we couldn't leave, and he started to talk to me. He said, "You seem to enjoy it." I said, "I love this stuff." He says, "I want you to do it seriously. I want you to go to New York for college, study Judaism seriously, go to a secular school as well, do whatever you want to do in life, but you've got to study Judaism seriously." He challenged me. I looked and said, "But Danny, I don't know any Hebrew. I can read it, but I can't speak a word of it." And he looked at me and it just said off the top of his head, "If you're willing to go, I will teach you Hebrew, and I find others like you, and you will learn Hebrew." And he did it. That summer, the following summer, he brought us to Silver Spring, Maryland, and there about 18 or 20 of us learned 10 hours a day for 8 weeks, and I learned enough Hebrew that the seminary accepted me. During this time, two other things happened. I started reading books about the Holocaust, and I couldn't stop. I read book after book, and the impact was enormous. I couldn't understand the evil, but it also taught me that the Jewish people must study, learn, and continue Judaism, because it had almost been wiped out, and we needed to rededicate ourselves to preserve the memories of those who died simply because they were Jews. And then came the 67 war, and by then I was sophisticated enough to realize what was going on. Jews were left alone. Israel was on her own. Yes, there was some help behind the scenes in terms of weaponry sent, so we got to thank the United States for that. But otherwise, it was fight or die. No one's going to come to our aid. And it was the same thing all over again, Jews being left alone to be slaughtered. But of course, it didn't happen, and that's when I became very much aware of Israel, even more than I had been in the earlier years, and was so much longing to make a visit. And finally, in my third year of undergrad, I was able to, and I was getting married that year. Laura and I married in the middle of the year. We flew back to the States, got married, went back to Israel for another 5 months, I spent a year there. My Hebrew got better and fell in love with the country, and it's never been since that year more than a year and a half without us visiting Israel.
נגיד גודלך, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ברוך אתה האדון.